And that'll do it. Here we go, the Rebel's Edge.
Episode 251.
Love it.
And Pete, this was supposed to be coming to people live from Puerto Rico, but we had a 3 hour, actually, what am I saying? 3 hours. We had a 5 hour delay for the flight. And that's after nothing flew for United yesterday. Nothing, they shut the whole thing down. You'd think maybe they would have checked a few of these planes out when they had them all shut down, but no. Everybody loads up on the plane, Pete, and then they say, there's a light that's out up here. We're going to need these guys will fix it quick. And then the pilot comes back on like 30, 40 minutes later and he goes, apparently it is a lot tougher than I thought to pull this fuse and put it back in. So it's going to take a while.
It is amazing, John. I mean, I'm always shocked by some of the craziness that happens during flights. I mean, like when they go, well, there's a seatbelt that's not working back in 4.8, but you got a wide open plane. It's like, so?
Yeah.
No one's using it. What the hell? Anyway, it is what it is.
I know. It is what it is, as he said. And this is what it is, which is the Rebel's Edge. Jared is going to be bringing you most probably surfing or snowboarding bears today because the market's kind of getting cracked.
Yep.
And we're going to tell you why. Yep, there he is, snowboarding bear. Because you see so many of them. Every once in a while, Pete, you see a video on YouTube of some snowboarder or skier or biker with a bear chasing them. And I got to think half of those are fake. But the one you just saw, folks, is real.
That was real.
That was real. Jared was filming it out in Aspen a couple weeks ago. All right. We start off with the macro minute. And I'm going to say, Pete, that the S&P Global U.S. Services PMI basically showed just over 50, 50.5 in August, down sharply from 52.3. And that's contributing a little bit to the weakness, I think, today, but I'm sure you'll have a couple other ideas as well.
Well, John, I'm just going to hit real quickly that I think this Chinese issue is the sluggish recovery is something that is going to be sluggish, and it's going to take a little while to get it to process through everybody and have an understanding of. We've heard from certain particular companies that sound completely different than from the country, right? I mean, we have seen the second largest economy in the world saying, hey, it's, we're coming, we're doing this. Oh, it's terrible. It's going to be, this is awful. They flip-flop around worse than our guys ever would. But all of a sudden you hear from an individual name company like a PDD, things look pretty good. You hear from the country itself and they're like, it's a sluggish recovery and we don't know what in the world's going on. And we don't know when it's going to get better. We're pretty resilient here, but they are not right now, John.
Yep. That is a fact, as is, it's time for Fantastic Futures.
Fantastic Futures!
That happens to be Pete's favorite part of the show.
Love it.
Let's go to, Pete, more crude reality because it is starting to come down on the airlines. I'm not delayed because of fuel prices, as far as I know, but Southwest, United, and Alaska Air all have raised jet fuel cost guidance, meaning that their second biggest cost, but behind employees, is going up.
Well, John, we're also seeing some puts being bought in jets actually as well. So that's been something that's been playing a part, not just today, not just yesterday, but we've seen this sort of trend of late. We'll see if that continues as well. I'm just going to tell you about the dollar. It's 105. It's something we've been talking about, how it's been on the rise. It was around 100, John, just back in July. And here we are now over 105. You combine that with the 2-year over 5, the 10-year still pushing back again towards those numbers that weren't quite the highs, but it's not that far away either. I think that's a combination for a lot of things that definitely today we're seeing people, palms are out and they are selling.
Yep. We're seeing triple-digit loss for the NASDAQ. And like Pete said, anytime you see the 10-year moving up, you're probably going to see the NASDAQ moving down. All right. Let's talk about AV, Pete, because as the name sort of implies, AeroVironment, these guys came out with quarterly results. And what do? Drones, among other things. Vertical lift vehicles, if you will. And man, quarterly earnings of $1 a share versus 40 cents, that'll get you rolling. And that compared to 10 cents a year ago. So this is one of those rare companies, Pete, that isn't just beating lowered expectations. And last year they did twice as much business. This year they're doing 10 times as much profit. And that's why shares are up 28%.
Not only up 28%, John, but brand new 52-week highs as well. This stock is absolutely on fire. You hit it right on the head, crushed it on the earnings, crushed it on the revenue. Their revenue, John, they were looking at year over year, 108 million to 152 million. There is not anything was wrong with this quarter as far as what was reported. It's pretty interesting to see a company that's doing so well, John, in this environment, all the difficulties everybody's got to deal with, but they have absolutely crushed it once again. It's why they're at 52-week highs. I think this is a name that's got a little bit more momentum to it even going forward. So even though they're hitting those 52-week highs, and oh, by the way, that volume, usually about 182,000 shares would trade in a single day. They had over 1 million shares in the first hour. So this thing is turning over, and people are starting to wake up and look at it and say, they got the good balance sheet. They're killing it. They're doing everything right. Maybe you have to take a little bit longer look because I think this thing's going higher.
Yeah, I would not disagree, Pete. I think you hold it at worst. If you bought it just for the earnings, sure, I'd take profits. I was not that lucky. I didn't buy it yesterday and then have a 28% gain today. But I think this one is one you want to hold on to. But I would probably overwrite it, meaning I'd sell calls against it in the short term, like 2 weeks to a month out. All right, let's talk, Pete, about one where we had unusual activity. We'll probably have to have Jared come up with something like Fantastic Futures for unusual activity. Roku, take a look at that, folks. Those were two hits. The first one occurred in the 80s. The next one occurred in the 90s as far as the price for Roku. And look at where Roku is today. I mean, the stock was rocking to the upside. They're going to cut 10% of their workforce. Pete and I never root for that. But when people do cut workforce, in other words, overhead, that's about 360 jobs, by the way. You normally do see a pop if everything else remains equal. And quite frankly, it was actually positive across the board over at Roku.
Yeah, their balance sheet, John, that's very strong. You look at the shorts got squeezed pretty good because they're about 5 to 7%, maybe even a little bit higher than that. But you mentioned some of those layoffs. And yeah, we're not trying to cheer that, but it's something we all expect, right? I mean, it's something that started really with Meta long ago. And then everybody else started kind of catching up and starting to do the same type of thing and getting more efficient because things have changed. And I think Roku is doing exactly that. This is their third round of layoffs. So it's not like they've waited. They're just continually doing the same thing. But when you raise your Q3 the way they did, John, and everything else that they did in the quarter, this is a pretty daggone well-run company right now. I'm not saying you got to chase it. We've seen a lot of call buying in there, but I am saying that this is one that on a pullback, I think you got to get pretty daggone interested because what they're telling you is they had a good quarter and they think next quarter is going to be even better.
If you ever wonder why your TVs are so cheap now, folks, the big screen TVs that we've all got, it's because of Roku. Because basically Roku made deals with a bunch of these TVs to operate their smart TV. In other words, they're using the Roku software without you having to buy that little Roku box. They're using the software in many cases. And that's why the TVs are so cheap. They could practically give them away, Pete, because they're making money on the ads and on the data of what shows you watch. Because if you didn't already know it, folks, there are people who will pay for that data because so much better than Nielsen. You know exactly how long somebody watched something and all the rest. All right, let's take a look, Pete, at ASAN, Asana. So down 14%, double-digit loss. They lost 4 cents instead of losing 11 cents. That much is good. Revenue beat as well. Obviously, that's good. but the guidance is not horrible, but it's still that they're going to continue to lose money. And if you listen to the show a lot, you know Pete doesn't like companies that lose money.
No, you are right, John. You know, it is interesting though, because yes, still losing money, but they did raise the full year. So, it's kind of got you, twisted around a little bit, and the stock getting really hit the way it's being hit. I think that they're on the right path, John. I think at some point these guys are going to finally be able to flip and maybe start making money. I would keep a really close eye on this one. And I know you're right. When they can't make money over a period of time, a long period of time, it's pretty frustrating. I usually think you stay away. I want to keep an eye on this one because they have a lot of different things right now that you could say, well, that's pretty bullish. That's pretty bullish. They've continued to get a little bit better. They're still just in negative territory. They break out of that, and I think that would be the trigger for this stock to actually start ripping to the upside. It hasn't happened yet, but I definitely would have this one on the board and watching it very close.
And it is up some 70 some odd percent, I think, on the year, Pete, but it's been a backing and filling kind of situation. So on a back like this, in other words, on a drop, I do think that gives you an opportunity. Some people have already taken advantage of it today because it was down as much as 16%. Now it's only down 11%. All right. Yeah. How about Enbridge, Pete? ENB. Trading to the downside, it was down 7.5 or 8% after the Canadian pipeline operator announced a surprise $14 billion bid to buy 3 different utilities from Dominion Resources, or Dominion Energy as they're called now. So that's why it's down, because they're spending a lot of money, but it might not be a dumb move. What do you think, Pete?
I think it's great, John. I mean, these guys now control North America. They by volume, they are the biggest under this, if this whole thing absolutely happened, blah, blah, blah. But yeah, so I think it's pretty interesting, John. I think, did they pay too much? That's probably the interpretation some people would have. Well, maybe, that's too big of a number and all the rest of it. That I really don't know. I don't know the company well enough to be able to assess that, but I can tell you this. They've got a great yield. The stock is getting hammered because of this large number, but can this thing continue to maybe start to bounce back a little bit and then become so big that they actually have a little bit more control over things? I think the answer is yes, yes, and yes. So for that reason, with a 7.5% yield, this is a pretty interesting one, John. For those that are a little bit more conservative, you want to be in energy, but you want to be in something where you're getting a pretty decent return. This one would be pretty interesting. I never buy anything just for yield, but I would say this, if everything else lines up and they've got that kind of yield, this one could be pretty daggone interesting, I'd say.
Yeah, and to Pete's point, folks, the stock is down on the year. So obviously the yield was lower when the stock was higher. But now with the stock down at 33.5 roughly, the yield does look very appealing. And the fact that they're going to have more throughput and pay out those dividends, like you say, Pete, I can't swear by the balance sheet, but I certainly like the looks of it going forward from this move. All right. Yeah. Well, that covers our 4 stocks, Pete. How about if we dive into some sports?
All right, John. So we've got 2 great games this weekend. And I say that because, a lot of the time in the first couple of weeks of college football, you don't have great games. You got a lot of these, the behemoths against somebody that they're going to kick the living tar out of. And some of these teams have already done some of that. So what makes this pretty interesting, though, is we've got Texas. They're ranked number 11, going to Alabama, Tuscaloosa, who's number 3. Now, first of all, I don't think Alabama's very happy about being ranked number 3. Second of all, and they've been talking all camp, who's going to be our quarterback? Who's going to be our quarterback? Well, Jalen Milroe is their quarterback. And John, he's a kid to watch. He's big, strong, athletic. He led them in rushing, did a great job passing. Typical Alabama, just, just plug them and play. This kid's another one of those guys. And then you've got Texas. Now, Texas is kind of one of these interesting teams. They're going to be joining the SEC. Right now, they're in the Big 12. It's going to be like a little bit of a premiere for them now going to Bama. They're going to have to play there with a fan base who's going to be in their face. It's going to be pretty interesting. I don't know, John. I think that one should be a really, really fun game. That's going to be very entertaining. It's like a 6:00 game, I think. But Ole Miss and your Tulane is the next one because a number 20 against believe it or not, Tulane, again, John, ranked in the top 25. That quarterback is back. He's absolutely incredible. Had a great week 1. He's had a great career down at Tulane, and the guy just rockets the ball everywhere. So I think that one should be a lot of fun. The kid's only thrown 72 touchdowns in his career at Tulane so far, so he's not all that great. He's only got 21 interceptions, by the way. This kid is a stud. Now, can he do it against Ole Miss, who's got a quarterback who's a big stud too? Jackson Dart had a monster game last week. But what do you think? Which games do you like? Those 2 games, or what are you looking for? And I know you love Tulane.
Of course, and I love Colorado, and I know they're playing Nebraska. So we'll see what Coach Prime does there, because he is Coach Prime, and they've almost crowned him already, Pete.
Crowned him, Jared? Did they crown him?
If you want to crown them, then crown their ass.
One of the best in all of sports. Let's say, Pete, Pratt is the quarterback over at Tulane, and to Pete's point, 4 touchdowns last week, only 1 incompletion, not interception, Pete, incompletion. In other words, this kid's just throwing darts and the guys are catching them. He does that again this week. They beat Ole Miss. As far as taking the points in the Bama game, I don't think Texas is as good as advertised, Pete, but we'll see. I think Bama at home beats them by more than the spread 7. I think they probably beat them by 10 or more. And as far as Colorado, yeah, I think Coach Prime wins again, but I don't know what the line's going to be on that one.
Well, I'm pretty impressed, because the national champion Colorado Buffalo football team of 2023, I'll tell you what, John, if the boys from Lincoln get down there and beat these guys in their own stadium at Folsom Field, I wonder what everybody's reaction will be. I'll throw it out there right now. That quarterback for Nebraska he can't throw interceptions. Threw 3 last week. That's terrible. They also had a fumble late in the game, which gave Minnesota the win. Otherwise, Nebraska has the win in their pocket, right? So I don't know. It could be really, really interesting. I'd like to see Sims down there. He's a big, strong guy, John. He transferred from Georgia Tech. I haven't crowned Colorado yet. I think you got to maybe play 3 or 4 games before you're the national title winner. But who am I? Anyway, let's go to the NFL. We got 2 really interesting things going on here, John. I'm curious your thoughts too. Is there a team that you just can't wait to see actually play? The preseason, we all know, I mean, they don't play. I think, they get in there for a series at best in the last preseason game, right? But what do you think? Because here's who I'm looking for. Detroit, number 1. I want to see what Detroit really looks like game 1. And it's at Kansas City in the greatest stadium there is, John, the Kingdom. It's phenomenal at Arrowhead. I can't wait for that one. Although Travis Kelce sounds like he might be out because of a knee.
With a knee.
Yeah. But all that being said, I just want to see Detroit, and I love Dan Campbell. I can't wait for that one. And New Orleans, because I want to see what Derek Carr looks like when he actually plays on a football team, not a team that just has offensive players. He'll finally have a defense. They have one of the best defenses in all of the NFL at New Orleans. So I can't wait to see what Derek Carr and those guys look like. They got a tough one. They got Tennessee, who I think is also very good. But what do you think? Are there games that you like, or are you looking at Detroit? What do you think?
Well, I got to say Bears Packers, because that's a rivalry that goes back nearly a century, Pete. And they don't like each other. Doesn't matter. You can put a bunch of guys from LA on the Packers and they still won't be friendly with the guys on the Bears. Too much history. But I do think you picked 2 great games, and I like the Tennessee-New Orleans matchup better than Kansas City-Detroit. I'd love to see Detroit do well, but I think, Mahomes is just Mahomes. And his winning percentage I saw today, Pete, when he is down 10 or more at halftime, his winning percentage for those games is better than, it's better than anybody in football, but it's also better than people that have those 10-point leads. In other words, you could give Brady a 10-point lead. His winning percentage from that point isn't better than Mahomes when he's trailing by that much.
Unreal.
So I think overall, Detroit's going to have a great year. I hope, and I do think they will, even though that's not good for my Bears. But I think the more interesting game really is to see how Carr does leading New Orleans, and has this guy been overlooked because of the pathetic defense, like you say, and the lack of wins out there in Vegas.
Yeah. And I'll tell you, John, one thing I love about Tennessee, they actually play real NFL football. They don't just play, a video game. They actually run with a running back who people don't want to face, Derrick Henry, believe me.
Nope.
And he's from where? Oh, that's right, Alabama. That kid is a stud. And I think one of the most underrated, even though people appreciate him, they don't know how good he is. And maybe it's because he's in Nashville. I don't know, John, but that guy's a lot of fun to watch. And I think Tannehill's got some receivers with DeAndre Hopkins and some of that. So that's going to be a fun team to watch this year, I think. Can they beat New Orleans? Sure. But I actually think New Orleans has got them.
All right. Well, I'm going to jump on the plane, Pete, head on down to San Juan. And I hope all of you head on back here tomorrow at 1 p.m. Eastern Time for the Rebels Edge, where Pete will be crowning them yet again tomorrow.
If you want to crown them, then crown their ass.
Colorado Buffaloes, baby. We'll see you tomorrow, folks, 1 p.m.